Mark adjusted his collar nervously as he stepped out of the hover taxi. The neon-lit streets of the alien city glowed with vibrant colors, casting shimmering reflections onto the sleek metallic buildings. It was his first time off Earth, and tonight marked an even bigger milestone. His first date with an alien. His heart raced, not just because of Zora's beauty, but also the thrill of stepping into the unknown. The restaurant Zora had chosen was impossible to miss. The entrance glowed with swirling lights, and the name, written in both English and an alien script, translated to "A Taste Beyond Stars." Mark took a deep breath before pushing open the door, his senses instantly overwhelmed by the rich aroma of unfamiliar spices and the gentle hum of alien music. The air was warm, almost welcoming, as if the restaurant itself wanted him to relax. "Mark," a cheerful voice called his name. He turned, and there she was, Zora. She was even more stunning in person than in her profile picture. Her skin had a faint shimmer, like starlight trapped beneath the surface, and her large violet eyes sparkled with excitement. She wore a flowing dress that shifted colors with every move, making it hard for Mark to look away. "You made it," she said, smiling warmly. Her voice was soft, but it carried a musical quality that made it impossible not to smile back. "Of course," Mark replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." Zora laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a breezy day. "Come on, let's get a table. I've already picked out something special for us." Mark followed her through the crowded restaurant, noticing the curious glances from other diners. Humans were still a rare sight in this part of the galaxy, and it was clear he was drawing attention. He couldn't tell if the stares were friendly or judgmental, but he decided to focus on Zora instead. She moved gracefully, like she belonged in a place like this, while he felt like a tourist fumbling through a foreign world. Their table was near a large window overlooking the city skyline. Beyond the glowing buildings, the twin moons of Zora's homeworld hung in the sky, casting a pale blue light. Mark couldn't help but marvel at the view. "It's beautiful," he said, gesturing to the window. Zora nodded, her eyes softening. "It's why I chose this place. I wanted to share something special with you." Before Mark could respond, a server approached their table. The alien had a translucent body that shimmered as it moved, and its voice was a pleasant hum. Zara spoke to it in her native language, the words flowing like a song. A moment later, the server placed 2 glowing drinks on the table. "What's this?" Mark asked, eyeing the swirling liquid in his glass. Zora grinned mischievously. "It's called Lunaris Nectar. Don't worry, it's safe for humans. It's supposed to relax you and enhance the experience." Mark raised an eyebrow, but took a cautious sip. The drink was sweet and tangy, with a warmth that spread through his body almost instantly. He felt his nerves start to fade, replaced by a strange sense of curiosity. "So," Zora began, leaning forward with an eager expression, "what made you decide to try interstellar dating?" Mark chuckled nervously. "I guess I just wanted to broaden my horizons. Earth feels so small sometimes, and I thought, why not see what else is out there? Plus, your profile caught my eye." Zora tilted her head, her shimmering skin catching the light. "Caught your eye? How so?" "Well," Mark hesitated, feeling the warmth of the drink encourage him. "You seemed real. Most profiles are just people trying to impress each other, but you talked about your love for stargazing and how you wanted to connect with someone who shares your curiosity. It felt genuine." Zora's expression softened, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw a hint of vulnerability. "That's sweet," she said quietly. "Most people just see me as an exotic novelty. It's refreshing to meet someone who sees beyond that." Their conversation flowed easily after that. They talked about their favorite foods, childhood memories, and even the differences in their cultures. Mark found himself laughing more than he had in months, and Zora's melodic laughter only made the evening more magical. But just as Mark started to feel completely at ease, Zora's tone shifted. She leaned closer, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Mark, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "What is it?" Mark asked, his curiosity piqued. Zara reached into her bag and pulled out a small holographic tablet. She placed it on the table, and with a swipe of her fingers, a glowing document appeared. Mark couldn't make out the alien script, but the words "compatibility contract" stood out in bold letters. "What's this?" he asked, his heart beginning to race again. Zara smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes now. "It's something we'll talk about later. For now, just enjoy the evening." Mark nodded slowly, but the seed of curiosity and unease had been planted. As they continued their meal, he couldn't shake the feeling that this date was about to take an unexpected turn. Mark couldn't stop staring at the holographic tablet glowing on the table between them. The shimmering alien script danced across the screen, but it was the bold, unmistakable title in English that held his attention. Compatibility contract. What is this?" Mark finally managed to ask, his voice unsteady. He tried to sound calm, but the sudden shift in mood had thrown him off completely. Zara's violet eyes softened, and she reached across the table, her delicate fingers brushing against his hand. "Mark," she said gently, "I didn't mean to startle you. I was going to bring this up later, but I feel like now is the right time." Mark pulled his hand back instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. "Bring up what exactly?" "I thought this was just a date. Dinner, maybe a walk under the moons. You know, normal stuff." Zara gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "It is a date, Mark, and I've enjoyed every moment of it so far. But where I come from, dating isn't just casual. It's meaningful. It's about building something bigger." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Mark felt a lump forming in his throat. "You're saying this isn't just about us having a good time?" Zara hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, exactly." She gestured to the holographic tablet. "This is what we call a compatibility contract. It's a formal agreement, a first step, if you will. It ensures that both parties understand what's at stake." Mark frowned, trying to process her words. "At stake? Zara, you're making this sound like some kind of business deal." Zara leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "Mark, my people, my entire species, we're at a crossroads. Our population is dwindling at an alarming rate. We've tried everything to reverse the decline, but nothing has worked. Our survival depends on finding compatible partners from other species." Her words hit him like a freight train. Mark stared at her, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Wait, are you saying this contract is about reproduction?" Zara didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze with unwavering intensity. "Yes," she said simply. "But it's more than that. It's about combining the strengths of our species. Humans are resilient, adaptive, and resourceful. You're exactly what we need to survive." Mark's mind raced. He wanted to laugh, to shake his head and dismiss everything she was saying as some kind of elaborate joke. But the look in Zora's eyes told him she was completely serious. "This is insane," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You can't just spring this on me out of nowhere. I thought we were getting to know each other, not negotiating some interstellar breeding program." Zara's expression softened again, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said quietly, "and I understand if you're feeling overwhelmed. But please, just hear me out." Mark didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Zara took it as a sign to continue. "My people aren't forcing this on anyone," she said. "That's why we use the compatibility contract. It's completely voluntary. Both parties have to agree. But Mark, you're special. I've reviewed your profile, your genetic markers, your personality traits. You're a perfect match." The words hung in the air, filling the silence between them. Mark felt like he was teetering on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to take the leap or step back into safety. "What happens if I say no?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "If you say no," she said slowly, "then nothing. You'll finish your meal, I'll pay for dinner, and you'll go back to Earth." But what?" Mark pressed, sensing there was more. Zara looked up, her eyes shimmering with a mix of hope and desperation. "But if you say yes, you'll be saving an entire species. You'll be part of something extraordinary, something that could change the course of history." Mark exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "This is a lot. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to decide right now," Zara said quickly. "Take your time. Think it over. But please, Mark, don't dismiss it outright. This could be the beginning of something incredible." She reached out again, and this time, Mark didn't pull away. Her touch was warm, almost soothing, and for a brief moment, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite identify. Curiosity, maybe even hope. As the server returned with their next course, the tension in the air eased slightly, but the weight of the conversation remained. Mark picked at his food, his mind racing with questions. Could he really walk away from this? Could he live with himself if he did? And then, just as he was starting to consider Zora's words, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's one more thing you should know, Mark," she said, her tone serious. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself. "If you refuse," she said softly, "you'll never know the truth about what makes you so special. And trust me, it's something you'd want to know." Mark sat frozen in his chair, the glowing holographic contract still hovering in the air between him and Zora. The weight of her words pressed down on him like an invisible force. An entire species was depending on him. It sounded like the plot of a bad science fiction movie. Yet here he was, face to face with an alien woman who seemed entirely sincere. "Zara," Mark began, his voice shaky, This can't be real. I mean, how does this even work? Why me? There must be thousands, millions of other humans out there. Why not choose someone else?" Zara leaned back in her chair, her violet eyes locking onto his. Her expression was calm, but there was a tension in her posture that Mark couldn't ignore. "Mark," she said softly, "you're not just any human. You're special, and I'm going to explain why. But first, I need you to promise me something." Mark frowned. "Promise you what?" "That you won't freak out. That you'll hear me out completely before making any decisions," Zara said, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you do that?" He hesitated. His instincts told him to run, to get as far away from this bizarre situation as possible. But something about Zara, her vulnerability, her honesty, kept him rooted to his seat. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Okay, I'll listen." Zara let out a small sigh of relief. "Thank you. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand the bigger picture." She glanced around the restaurant, her expression suddenly wary. "Not here, though. It's not safe." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Not safe? What do you mean?" Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and extended her hand. "Come with me. There's a place nearby where we can talk privately." Mark hesitated again, his mind racing. He barely knew Zara, and now she wanted him to leave the safety of the restaurant. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw no trace of deception, only urgency. "Fine," he said, standing reluctantly. "But this better not be some kind of trap." Zara smiled faintly. "Trust me, Mark. If I wanted to trap you, I wouldn't need to try this hard." She led him out of the restaurant and into the cool, bustling streets of the alien city. The neon lights reflected off the polished surfaces of the buildings, casting strange, shifting shadows. Mark followed Zara closely, his eyes darting nervously at the unfamiliar surroundings. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After a few minutes of weaving through narrow alleys and side streets, Zara stopped in front of a small, unmarked building. She pressed her hand against the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. "Come in," she said, stepping inside. Mark hesitated on the threshold, peering into the dimly lit interior. It looked like some kind of laboratory, with sleek metal tables and glowing equipment scattered around. The air smelled faintly of ozone. "What is this place?" he asked, stepping cautiously inside. "It's a safe house," Zara replied, closing the door behind them. "A place where I can explain everything without being overheard." "Overheard by who?" Mark demanded, his nerves fraying. Zara turned to face him, her expression deadly serious. "By the ones who don't want us to succeed." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are they? What's going on, Zara?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "Mark, my people aren't just facing extinction. We're being hunted." "Hunted?" Mark repeated, his voice rising. "By who? Why?" "By a rival species," Zara said. "They see us as a threat. They've been sabotaging our efforts to rebuild, and they'll do anything to ensure we don't survive. That's why the compatibility contract is so important. It's not just about saving my people. It's about creating a future where we can fight back." Mark stared at her, his mind struggling to keep up. "What does this have to do with me? I'm just a regular guy. I don't know anything about intergalactic politics or wars." Zara stepped closer, her gaze intense. "You're not just a regular guy, Mark. Your genetic profile is unique. It contains traits that could make our offspring stronger, more adaptable. With your help, we could tip the balance of power in our favor." Mark felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. "You're saying I'm some kind of key to your species' survival?" "Yes," Zara said simply, "and not just ours. If we fall, it's only a matter of time before the hunters turn their attention to Earth. Helping us means helping humanity too." The room fell silent, the weight of Zara's words settling over them. Mark's thoughts raced, a whirlwind of doubt, fear, and an odd sense of responsibility. He wanted to believe she was telling the truth, but it all seemed too surreal. "And if I say no?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara hesitated, her expression unreadable. "If you say no, you'll be free to leave. I'll make sure of it. But you'll also be walking away from a chance to make a difference. A chance to save lives, including your own." Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had come here expecting nothing more than an awkward first date. Now he was being asked to play a role in an interstellar struggle for survival. As he stood there, Zara reached out and gently touched his arm. "You don't have to decide right now," she said softly. "But whatever you choose, please know that meeting you has given me hope. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Mark nodded, unable to find the words to respond. Deep down, he knew that no matter what he decided, his life would never be the same. Mark's mind raced as Zara's words echoed in his head. "If you say no, you'll be free to leave. But the hunters won't stop with us. They'll come for Earth next." The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating and surreal. He glanced at Zara, her face unreadable, but her shimmering eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. I need some air," he said abruptly, taking a step back. Zara hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. I understand this is a lot to process." Her voice was soft, almost regretful, but Mark couldn't focus on her tone. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to run, to put as much distance between himself and this insane situation as possible. He walked toward the door, trying to keep his pace steady. Zara didn't stop him, though he could feel her eyes on his back. As the door slid open, the cool night air hit his face, bringing a fleeting sense of relief. Mark stepped into the empty alley and glanced around. The alien city seemed quieter now, the neon lights casting long, eerie shadows. He needed a plan. He couldn't just wander aimlessly, especially in a place where humans were rare and conspicuous. His best chance was to find a transport hub and get back to his ship, or at least somewhere with a human embassy. But as he turned the corner, his heart sank. Two figures stood at the end of the alley, their tall, angular forms silhouetted against the glowing lights. They weren't human. Mark froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figures turned toward him, and he saw their faces, or what should have been faces. Instead, their heads were smooth, featureless domes, with faint lines that pulsed with an unsettling glow. Their movements were unnaturally smooth, like predatory machines. One of them stepped forward, a low, mechanical voice cutting through the silence. "Human, you're out of place." Mark took a shaky step back, his heart pounding. "I was just leaving." The second figure tilted its head, the glow on its dome intensifying. "You are with her. The target. Hand over any information, and your life will be spared." Zara's words about the hunters slammed into Mark's mind like a freight train. These weren't random aliens. They were the ones Zara had warned him about. And now, they were here for him. "I don't know anything," Mark blurted, raising his hands. "I'm just a tourist." The first figure stepped closer, its movements eerily silent. "Tourists do not leave secured zones. You will comply." Mark's fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he spun on his heel and sprinted back down the alley, his boots pounding against the metal ground. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the hunters pursuing him. He rounded a corner, his lungs burning, and nearly collided with Zara. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mark, what are you doing?" "They found me," he gasped, his voice trembling. "The hunters. You didn't tell me they were this close." Zara's eyes widened, and she pulled him into a side corridor. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her voice urgent. She tapped on a small device strapped to her wrist, and a shimmering energy field enveloped them, blending them into the shadows. Mark tried to steady his breathing, his mind racing. "What now?" he whispered. "We wait," Zara replied, her voice barely audible. "The field will mask us for a few minutes, but we can't stay here long." As if on cue, the hunters appeared at the end of the corridor. Mark held his breath, his pulse hammering in his ears. The two figures moved slowly, scanning the area with beams of light that seemed to pierce the darkness. Mark could feel the energy of their searchlights passing near inches from his skin, and every muscle in his body screamed at him to run. Zara's hand tightened on his arm, grounding him. He glanced at her and saw that her expression had shifted. The calm, collected woman he'd met at dinner was gone, replaced by someone fierce and determined. Her other hand hovered over a small device on her belt, her finger twitching slightly as if ready to act at a moment's notice. The hunters paused, their domes glowing faintly as they exchanged a series of clicks and hums. Then, without warning, one of them raised its arm, a sleek weapon unfolding with a menacing hiss. "They're scanning for residual energy," Zara whispered. "We have to move. Now." Before Mark could protest, Zara deactivated the energy field and grabbed his hand, pulling him down another alley. The hunters reacted instantly, their pursuit relentless. Mark's legs felt like lead, but Zara moved with a speed and agility that seemed almost inhuman. She led him through a maze of side streets, her movements purposeful and precise. Finally, they burst into a narrow passage lined with crates and equipment. Zara skidded to a halt, her chest heaving. She turned to Mark, her eyes blazing. "We can't keep running. We need to fight." "Fight?" Mark echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. "With what? I don't even have a weapon." Zara pulled a sleek, compact device from her belt and handed it to him. "This will do," she said. "Point and press. But aim carefully. These things have shields." Mark stared at the device, his hands trembling. He wasn't a fighter, let alone someone who could face down alien hunters. But as the sound of mechanical footsteps grew louder, he realized he didn't have a choice. "Mark," Zara said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "I need you to trust me. Together, we can get out of this. But I need you to be brave." Mark met her gaze, a flicker of determination sparking in his chest. He gripped the weapon tightly and nodded. "Let's do this." The hunters appeared at the entrance to the passage, their glowing domes scanning the area. Zara stepped forward, her own weapon at the ready. "Come on then," she said, her voice cold and defiant. "Let's see what you've got." And with that, the fight began. Mark ducked behind a stack of crates, his pulse hammering in his ears. He clutched the sleek alien weapon Zara had handed him, his fingers trembling as the cold, metallic surface pressed against his palms. The sounds of battle echoed in the narrow passage, blasts of energy, sharp metallic screeches, and Zara's determined voice barking commands. He peeked out just in time to see Zara dodge a beam of pulsating energy from one of the hunters. She moved with a grace and precision that left him awestruck. In the heat of the moment, she seemed invincible, her shimmering skin glowing faintly as she fired back with a calculated intensity. Mark had no idea how she could stay so calm under pressure. But he didn't have time to admire her. One of the hunters turned its faceless dome toward his hiding spot, its weapon humming ominously as it charged. Mark panicked, raising his own weapon and pressing the trigger. A burst of blue light shot out, hitting the hunter's shield. The force sent a ripple across the energy barrier, but the creature didn't falter. Instead, it advanced, its movements deliberate and unrelenting. "Mark, focus," Zara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Aim for the emitter, the glowing point near its chest." He gritted his teeth, adjusting his aim. The hunter's weapon fired, narrowly missing him and leaving a scorch mark on the crate beside him. Mark inhaled sharply and steadied his hands. He squeezed the trigger again, and this time, the blue energy beam struck true. The emitter on the hunter's chest flared brightly before the shield collapsed. The creature froze for a moment, then crumpled to the ground in a heap of lifeless metal. Mark let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had done it. He had actually taken one down. But there was no time to celebrate. Zara's voice called out again, urgency lacing her words. "Mark, over here. We need to move." He scrambled to his feet, sprinting toward Zara. She stood near the far end of the passage, her weapon still raised as she kept the remaining hunter at bay. Once Mark reached her, she pressed a button on her wrist device, and a section of the wall behind her slid open, revealing the hidden tunnel. "This way," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him inside. The door slid shut behind them, cutting off the sounds of the fight. For a moment, there was silence, save for their heavy breathing. Mark leaned against the wall, his body trembling with adrenaline. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "You said you'd explain everything, Zara, but you've done nothing but drag me deeper into this madness." Zara's expression softened, and she lowered her weapon. "You're right," she said quietly. "You deserve the truth. All of it." Mark stared at her, his chest heaving. "Then start talking." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. For the first time since he had met her, Zara looked unsure of herself, vulnerable. She took a deep breath and began. "My people have been fighting this war for centuries," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "The hunters, those machines, they were created by a rival species, a race that believed we were too dangerous to exist. They saw our genetic potential as a threat, so they built the hunters to wipe us out." Mark frowned, trying to piece it all together. "And you think humans can help you stop them? By mixing our DNA?" Zara nodded. "Your species is unique, Mark. Your genetic adaptability, your resilience, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. If we can combine those traits with ours, we might stand a chance. We could create a new generation that's stronger, smarter, and capable of outmaneuvering the hunters." Mark's mind raced. "But why me? Out of all the humans out there, why am I the one standing here?" Zara hesitated again, her shimmering eyes meeting his. Because you're not like other humans, Mark. Your genetic markers, they show something extraordinary. You're compatible with our DNA in a way that no one else is. It's almost as if you were designed for this. Designed. Mark's voice rose, disbelief and anger mingling in his tone. What does that even mean? Are you saying this isn't a coincidence? Zara shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's fate. All I know is that you're the key to saving my people, and possibly your own. Mark's stomach churned. He wanted to believe she was lying, that this was all some elaborate trick. But the sincerity in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, it was impossible to ignore. He took a shaky step forward, his voice softer now. And if I help you, he said, what happens to me? Do I get a say in any of this, or am I just a pawn in your war? Zora's expression tightened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You'll always have a choice, Mark, she said firmly. I promise you that. But please, understand, this isn't just about my people. The hunters won't stop with us. If they win, Earth will be next. Helping us means protecting your own future. Mark looked away, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't trust Zora completely, but he couldn't ignore the weight of her words. The thought of Earth being targeted by those mechanical monsters sent a chill down his spine. Fine, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll help, but this doesn't mean I trust you. Zora gave him a small, sad smile. I don't expect you to. Not yet. But thank you, Mark. You've given me hope. As they stood there in the dimly lit tunnel, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn from which there was no return. Mark's hands still trembled from the chaos of their escape. The cool, dimly lit tunnel they now occupied seemed worlds apart from the neon glow of the city or the tense battleground they had just left behind. He leaned against the cold metal wall, his breaths shallow as he tried to process everything Zora had revealed. Across from him, Zara knelt beside a small console embedded in the tunnel wall. Her fingers moved swiftly across the glowing interface, her expression unreadable as she activated a series of security measures. The faint hum of energy shields powering up filled the silence. This tunnel leads to a safe zone, Zara said without looking up. We'll be secure there, at least for a while. Mark watched her, his emotions a tangle of anger, confusion, and reluctant admiration. She had just fought off deadly alien machines with the grace of a seasoned warrior. Yet here she was, quiet and composed, as if the weight of her people's survival wasn't pressing down on her shoulders. You owe me answers, he said finally, his voice cutting through the hum of the console. Zora paused, then straightened and turned to face him. Her violet eyes shimmered faintly in the dim light, but there was no trace of the fierce warrior who had just saved his life. She looked tired, vulnerable. You're right, she said softly. I do. Mark crossed his arms, trying to keep his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. So this deal you keep talking about, what exactly does it involve? And don't give me any more vague promises or cryptic warnings. I want the truth. Zara hesitated, then gestured for him to sit on a nearby bench. He hesitated, but the exhaustion in his legs convinced him to comply. Zara sat across from him, her posture tense. The compatibility contract is more than just a genetic agreement, she began. It's a partnership. It's about building trust and working together for a shared goal. If you agree to it, you won't just be helping us reproduce. You'll be part of our fight for survival. Mark raised an eyebrow. What does that mean, exactly? Are you expecting me to become some kind of soldier? Not a soldier, Zara said quickly, but a collaborator. You'd work alongside us to develop strategies, strengthen our defenses, and yes, help create the next generation of hybrids. Mark blinked, taken aback by her bluntness. You make it sound so simple, but it's not, is it? You're asking me to give up my life, my freedom, everything I've ever known. And for what? to gamble on some experiment that might not even work. Zara's gaze didn't waver. I won't lie to you, Mark. There are no guarantees, but if we don't try, we're doomed. And if we fall, Earth will be next. The hunters won't stop with us. They see all life as a threat to their creator's vision of order. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling to the surface. You keep saying that, but how do I know it's true? For all I know, you could be manipulating me, using fear to get what you want. Zara flinched, and for a moment, Mark thought she might lash out. But instead, she lowered her head, her voice trembling with emotion. I understand why you don't trust me. I wouldn't trust me either, if I were in your position. But everything I've told you is the truth. She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Do you think this is easy for me? Asking for help from someone I barely know. Putting my people's fate in the hands of a stranger. I've spent my whole life fighting to protect them, Mark. And now I'm standing here, begging you to help me because I have no other choice. Her words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on his own fear and confusion that he hadn't stopped to consider what this was costing her. Zara wasn't just a warrior or a diplomat. She was someone desperate to save her people, willing to risk everything to do so. He sighed, his anger deflating. Okay, he said quietly. Let's say I agree to this. Partnership. What happens next? What do you need me to do? Zara's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand hovering near his before withdrawing. The first step is simple. We'll run some tests to confirm your compatibility and ensure the process is safe. After that, we'll work together to create a plan. Your role will depend on your strengths and skills. Mark frowned. And what if I change my mind? What if I decide I can't do this? Zara met his gaze, her voice steady. Then you'll be free to leave. I won't force you to stay. But I hope you'll give us a chance to show you that this is about more than just survival. It's about hope. For both of our species. Mark studied her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of deception. But all he saw was honesty and desperation, and something else he couldn't quite name. All right, he said finally. I'll help, but I'm not making any promises beyond that. Zara's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Mark. You don't know how much this means to me. To all of us. As they stood and prepared to continue their journey, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped onto a path he could never turn back from. The deal was made, and whether it led to salvation or disaster, only time would tell. Mark stared out the window of the safe house, his eyes fixed on the alien city below. The twin moons bathed the landscape in a pale, ghostly light, their glow casting long shadows across the metallic buildings and shimmering streets. He couldn't shake the weight of Zara's words, or the deal he had just agreed to. Behind him, Zara was busy with a holographic interface, her fingers moving deftly across the glowing display. She had been explaining the next steps, laying out a plan for their collaboration. But Mark's thoughts kept drifting, his mind torn between fear and determination. Mark. Zara's voice broke through his reverie. Are you sure about this? He turned to face her. Her expression was calm, but her violet eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. It was the first time she had asked him that question since he'd agreed to the compatibility contract, and it made him pause. Honestly, he said, running a hand through his hair. No, I'm not sure. But I don't think I have much of a choice, do I? Zara sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. You always have a choice. That's why I've been honest with you from the beginning. If you want to walk away, you can. I won't stop you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Mark considered them. He thought about Earth, about the life he had left behind. The quiet nights in his apartment, the friends who had no idea where he was, the simple, ordinary life he had taken for granted. Could he really give all of that up for this? For a cause he barely understood. But then he thought about the hunters, the faceless, relentless machines that had nearly killed him. He thought about Zara's people, fighting a losing battle against an enemy bent on their extinction. And he thought about Zara herself, the vulnerability behind her strength, the hope in her eyes when she spoke about their future. "I don't think I could live with myself if I walked away," Mark said finally. "Not after everything you've told me. Not after seeing what you're up against." Zara's expression softened, and she took a step closer. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Mark." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Brave? I feel like I'm flying blind here. I don't even know if I'm making the right decision." "Sometimes," Zara said, her voice gentle, "the right decision isn't about certainty. It's about doing what feels right in your heart." Mark looked at her, searching her face for any sign of deceit, but all he saw was sincerity. Slowly, he nodded. "All right. What's next?" Zara's demeanor shifted, her posture straightening as she activated another series of holograms. The air around them shimmered with projections of star maps, genetic models, and tactical plans. "The first step is securing your genetic data. Our scientists need to confirm the compatibility markers we detected earlier. Once we have that, we can begin the process of synthesizing hybrid DNA." Mark raised an eyebrow. "And this process, it's safe, right?" Zara nodded. "Completely. You'll undergo a series of tests, but nothing invasive. I'll be with you every step of the way." Her words were meant to reassure him, but they only made Mark more aware of the enormity of what he was stepping into. He watched as Zara manipulated the holograms, her focus unwavering. She was a leader, a warrior, and now his partner in this strange, improbable alliance. Suddenly, the holograms flickered, and an alert sounded. Zara's face darkened as she studied the display. "They found us." Mark's stomach dropped. "The hunters?" "Yes," Zara said, her voice tight. "They're closing in. We need to move." She grabbed a small device from the table and handed it to Mark. "This is a portable shield generator. It'll protect you in case we're separated. Stick close to me." Mark took the device, his hands trembling. "What about the safe house? Isn't it secure?" "Not anymore," Zara said grimly. "They must have tracked us from the tunnel." Before Mark could respond, the walls of the safe house shuddered, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. Zara pulled him toward the door, her weapon drawn. "Stay behind me," she ordered. "And no matter what happens, don't stop running." They burst into the open, the cold night air biting at Mark's skin. The city was eerily silent, the usual hum of activity replaced by an oppressive stillness. In the distance, Mark saw the hunters, tall, faceless machines moving with mechanical precision, their glowing domes cutting through the darkness. Zara didn't hesitate. She fired a burst of energy at the nearest hunter, the beam striking its shield and sending a ripple through the air. "Go," she shouted, pushing Mark forward. He ran, his legs burning as he sprinted through the labyrinthine streets. The shield generator hummed faintly in his hand, its energy field enveloping him in a faint glow. Behind him, he heard the clash of weapons and the mechanical screeches of the hunters. As he rounded a corner, Mark skidded to a halt. Zara was there, her chest heaving, as she fended off two hunters at once. Her movements were fluid and precise, but Mark could see the strain on her face. "Mark," she called out, her voice sharp, "get to the rendezvous point. Now." "I'm not leaving you," he shouted back. Zara's eyes blazed. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us. Go." For a moment, Mark hesitated. But then he saw the determination in Zara's eyes, the unshakable resolve of someone who would fight to the end for what she believed in, and he realized that he couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. With a final, reluctant glance, he turned and ran. The sounds of battle faded behind him, replaced by the pounding of his heart and the echo of Zara's words in his mind. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us." When he finally reached the rendezvous point, a small, concealed transport pod, Mark stopped and looked back. The city was alight with distant explosions and streaks of energy fire. Somewhere out there, Zora was still fighting, still holding the line. Mark clenched his fists, a surge of determination coursing through him. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. This wasn't just Zora's fight anymore. It was his too.